Welcome to the EcoParent Podcast Network. I'm Sam, the founder of EcoParent Magazine. If you listened to any of the first 5 episodes of this show, then you're familiar with the tumultuous history of EcoParent's early years. Don't worry, I won't subject you to that again. Instead, I just want to remind you of why we do this. It's for you. EcoParent has always been for you. The parents who go the extra mile to do a little better for their kids, their families, and for the planet. But the relationship is symbiotic. EcoParent also needs you. So if you like these podcasts and find that they add value to your life, if they inspire you or make you feel more connected, please share them with your friends. Reviews are also a great way to tell the listening platform that the podcast is worth recommending. So, if you're not busy driving a kid here or there, or making supper, or any of the other awesome parent stuff that you do, please take the time to pause this recording and give it a quick review, or text it to a friend.
Dad, can we record the outro?
Sure.
It isn't really our job to try to fix things, but to just provide our body with the building blocks and let the body do what it's supposed to do. It is not our job to try to always figure out what the body is doing wrong, right? Our body knows what to do right. It is always aiming for homeostasis. So if we give it what it needs, it will do what it's supposed to do.
The Feeding Families podcast is all about nutrition for kids. We bring you new ideas and inspiration for your kitchen and answers to your food questions so you can overcome the very real, very frustrating food-related challenges so many parents are trying to figure out. I'm your host, Jess Sherman, family wellness educator, author, practitioner of functional and holistic nutrition, and mother. I want you to develop unwavering confidence in the choices you make every day. So let's get into Feeding Families.
The back-to-school struggle is real, but it doesn't have to be. I'm Dr. Owen Wiseman with some tips on how A-Vogel can help. As little ones prep for their return to class, every parent has the same goals: protect their kids from viral infections and arm them with the tools to perform their best. A-Vogel's Echinoforce Jr. has been clinically proven to significantly reduce colds, flu, pneumonia, bronchitis, and the need for antibiotics in kids ages 2+. When your tots are healthy, they're able to focus better and concentrate on their learning. The best part is that kids will love the chewable tabs' natural orange flavor, minus the sugar. A-Vogel Echinoforce Jr., both kid and mom approved. Also available in adult formats at health food stores and pharmacies.
Hello, families, and welcome back to another episode of the Feeding Families podcast. Today, we are going to tackle some big topics. We're going to talk about food quality issues, food choices. I mean, we as parents have to make choices every single day about how we're going to budget, how we're going to spend our money, what's going to go on the table. Do we choose organic? Do we not choose organic? I know that families have questions about glyphosate and chemicals that are in our products, and what do we do about that? Is that a big issue? So I have invited a wonderful woman to talk about this. My guest today is Kathleen DiChiara. Kathleen, first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce you and read your bio in just a second, but let me just say I invited Kathleen because I wanted someone to come and talk about chemicals and glyphosate particularly. But I started, reading some of your stuff. I've of course seen the documentary that you were in, and we'll talk about that. But we have so many things we can cover and talk about. This is going to be a really juicy episode. So thank you for your time. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure to be here.
Kathleen DiChiara is a practitioner of functional nutrition and founder of Rhode Health Incorporated. She's an internationally recognized nutrition educator, author, researcher, speaker, mom, and health advocate. Now, Kathleen's story is quite dramatic. She broke into the field of nutrition when she was 35, and she went from being a competitive triathlete working in capital markets at the Fortune 500 company to completely disabled, completely incapacitated. And at the same time, her son was diagnosed with autism. And these events all served as inspiration for Kathleen's career change and her commitment to re-education. She's written several books. Her most recent award-winning book is called End Chronic Disease: The Healing Power of Beliefs, Behavior, and Bacteria. And it explores the intersection of mindset, daily habits, and the microbiome. So clearly we have a lot to talk about because this fits right into what we talk about at the Feeding Families podcast. So I want to start with your story. Now, Kathleen's story was featured in a documentary film called Secret Ingredients. So if you've been thinking, oh, I've heard that name, you have heard that name. And you've written, Kathleen, that your hope and your recovery and your resilience came through your discovery that our loss of microbial diversity and poor digestive function can lead to an increased vulnerability for acute and chronic disease, which is the type of disease that you had, right? So let's start there and let's just unpack that a little bit. Tell us about your journey with food, your journey with illness, and this discovery between the gut and disease vulnerability.
Great. Yeah. So I will say that what's interesting about our story, we ended up, once I made the discovery that things were kind of terribly wrong. We accumulatively, our family of 5 had 25 chronic illnesses. But what really, really opened my eyes was not all of my chronic challenges, my disabilities, not the developmental delays that my son had, not that my middle child had bronchitis and was getting x-rays of his chest. It was the chronic eczema and the anaphylactic allergies that my youngest son had. His very visual manifestation at an infant age was really the push, the thing that put me over the edge, because he checked all the boxes for what a healthy child should have. In other words, he was breastfed, he was born vaginally, he was exposed to animals, he was exposed to peanuts in the house. All the things that would decrease his risk of having allergies were checked off. We didn't have chemicals in the house because, of course, I was already a health coach at that point. I was already aware of food choices. I was already aware of many of the things that would potentially make somebody sensitive. So this was very frustrating for me to see that he was having this incredible sensitivity and this reaction to his environment and his food. So yes, I took him to an allergist, and that's when he got his EpiPen. Then I took him to an immunologist, an allergist who I thought, okay, this is the guy that's going to help answer these questions. He's trained not only in allergy, but also immunology. And he said, you need to give him steroids and you need to put him on Zantac all day and you need to rub him 3 times a day with these gels and creams. And I thought, this is ludicrous. He's 2 years old. I'm not lubricating him all day long. And that was created such rage in me that these were the answers that if I knew I was getting them, I knew every family was getting the same information. And I just knew that was wrong. I knew that was wrong. I knew intuitively that he should not be having these kinds of reactions. And that's what really pushed me to dig deeper, to go even beyond. Because we just felt, my husband and I were athletes. We always thought we'd have healthy children. And, we were now on this trajectory of heading down a different path. Our children were manifesting other illnesses that we simply never anticipated, never expected. And we thought, what has happened? Where did we go wrong? What are we doing wrong? We're cooking our food at home. We don't do fast food. I mean, I don't know where we took a wrong turn. And so I think that was really the catalyst for me. And I think it's because his symptoms were so visual to me that I could see the skin reactions. I could see the bleeding, the cracking, and the suffering was so pronounced. Whereas so much of the other things that I was dealing with, the chronic pain, the fibromyalgia, the brain fog, the other disabilities, I could make excuses for why all those might be happening. I had this sudden onset neuropathy. I had back surgery. The back surgery failed. I had postoperative paralysis that led to high doses of medication. That medication led to, I had kind of had a story for that, but I didn't have a story for this healthy child and why this was all falling apart. So that really was the push for me. And I would say that was kind of that introduction for me to ask much deeper questions and get to the bottom of what was happening for all of us.
Like you were already deep into it, right? So when you say I had to go deeper. We're talking about really deep. I mean, there's a lot of families who start at a different place, and like, you know, they have to get their kids off of fast food, for example, or you already knew all that stuff. You already were coming from a strong knowledge base, right?
I was more aware that there was some simple things that I could do, like, taking food dyes out, or, not using laundry detergent that had a lot of fragrances and things. In other words, I was sort of aware that there was some basic lifestyle changes that I could make that would make us less susceptible to allergies and irritants and things like that. So I would say that I was more conscientious of some everyday choices. And I think we can all kind of get there in some way. Those are things that we can all read those in magazines. We can read articles on what are some of the things that we can all do, practice, in our own homes to make us less susceptible to, allergies or skin issues and things like that. So yeah, I was aware, but I think the difference is when he was having those reactions, it really forced me to look a little bit more deeply at the bigger question, which was, is this something that's manifesting in him and him alone? Or is something happening to all of us? Like, is he the only one that's unhealthy? And I just need to resolve his allergies? Or is what's happening to him happening to all of us? And that's really the big question. I mean, I feel that that's really what's happening in everyone's household. It isn't just one individual that's suffering. Everyone's suffering in very different ways. The challenge is we can't thread those together because they are manifesting in very different ways. And so it's very difficult for us to say, well, this one thing is showing up in very different ways. And so what happens is we have to remember that pathology, diseases, illness does manifest in each one of us very differently. But how we approach health is we have to really say to ourselves, what is the one thing we're all doing? Because remember, each household is a community, and you're all often doing the same, eating the same foods, living this similar behavior patterns. So you have to say to yourself, well, we're all sort of doing the same thing. And what's the one thing that we're all doing? What are some of those same things that we're doing that we can change? And let's see what changes in each of us.
Yeah, I think that's a really important and profound perspective for families to take, because I think when a child gets sick, or a child has an allergy, or a child has a condition, and I think your instinct was this too. It's like, well, let's fix that. What can I do to fix that? Right? Our initial instinct, is it a food? Is there something I can give them? What I hear you saying is, let's think about this differently. It's not about fixing a person. It's about addressing the entire ecosystem, not only of their body, because our body is interconnected ecosystem, but also the environment in which they live, the community in which they live, their connections with everything that's around them, including their food, but also everything. And then it extends to our outside communities and our global community. And you can go on and on and on.
You got it. 100%. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Because we can drive ourselves crazy trying to find the thing, right? The thing that spreads this all together. And I kind of find it a little bit refreshing to say, well, you don't have to find the thing. There probably isn't a thing, but let's look at some patterns and figure out what we can do with the pattern. So what was it for you guys?
Yeah. So, and I love what you just said too, because there is never a thing, right? And when we do try to chase the thing, what we play is a game of whack-a-mole, which is, I'm going to do this, and then another thing is going to, and the thing we have to remember is that our bodies are complex. They are ecosystems. Everything is changing. The dynamic is changing. And it can be very difficult to do that for yourself, never mind do it for a child, to do it for multiple people. So, I would say that to try to figure that out would be something that most of us would really struggle with. So the idea there is to remember that it isn't really our job to try to fix things, but to just provide our body with the building blocks and let the body do what it's supposed to do. It is not our job to try to always figure out what the body is doing wrong, right? Our body knows what to do, right? It is always aiming for homeostasis. So if we give it what it needs, it will do what it's supposed to do.
Just to pick up on that, I wonder if that might be our human tragic flaw.
Oh, yeah, I think it is.
Of just Needing to know.
Yeah.
I just need to know.
Yes, I need to know. Yeah. And that we think we know more than, a system that is so complex and so beautiful and so sophisticated.
And so wise. We've done other episodes about just the wisdom of our body that really, really is programmed for health and growth and healing,
Yes.
like in so many different ways, on so many different levels. And it's hard to trust that because you can't see it. It's complicated, like you say. How did you get there?
Right. I mean, we're just learning, years ago, like I remember giving a lecture and talking about taste and taste receptors, and we were talking about bitter and sour receptors and in the nose and in the mouth. And I remember years ago, I had talked about that we had discovered taste receptors in the testicles, in the lungs, in the kidneys, in almost all of our vital organs. And now a lot of that research is really pointing to the fact that obviously you would think, why do you need taste receptors in the kidneys? Why do you need them in these organs? And really what they're doing is regulating for different mineral levels. So if you have too much salt in the blood, the taste receptors in the kidneys recognize that and they create homeostasis and will, flush the urine to release the levels of sodium. So there's all kinds of regulatory systems in the body all throughout our organs to create balance when we force it out of balance, when we don't have enough water, when we have too much sodium, when things are in disarray. So like you said, there is things happening that we just don't know about yet, that we don't understand, that we've yet to discover. And our body is beautifully doing that incredible orchestra of creating balance for us. So I think we have to just respect that that's happening on its own until we know more.
Yeah. Yeah. And we like to get in its way, right? Like we like to give ourselves things and also deprive ourselves of things that our body needs to do that work. And so maybe those are some of the patterns that you were finding for your family, right?
Yes, exactly. So for us, once I started to dig a little bit more into the immune system and, when we learn about skin conditions and we learn about, why somebody might be reacting to their food, the key thing to remember with food sensitivities that then manifest as anaphylaxis or eczema or, any type of skin condition that's usually pretty instantaneous is we know now that it's the immune system. It's not a food problem. It's the immune system is having a reaction. And that brought my attention right away to the microbiome. So once I was there in the research of the microbiome, and this was about 9 or 10 years ago, it was at the early stages of a lot of the research hadn't come out quite yet about some of these connections, but there was still quite a bit of data showing that once we make some of those disruptions, that it's very, very difficult for the body to regulate response to our food. So I ask the next question, which is what disrupts the microbiome? Why would somebody who's very young be having these kinds of disruptions, especially somebody who hasn't really lived a long life? In this case, I was talking about my 2-year-old, because now I'm just trying to answer this question of why are we seeing these reactions? Because I know this is going to open up some important doors for me in terms of answering some larger questions. And for us, it pointed me to the food that we were eating. And many parents listening to this, families listening to this, should ask themselves the same question. Not what are the global issues, what's affecting everybody in the world, what affects everybody's immune system. All want to be asking, what is it in our family? So what I did was I said, what are we doing? What are the foods that we're eating pretty regularly and what potentially is in those foods? So you just now go right down to what you're doing and then ask the question. And that's what I did. And so I looked at some of the top ingredients that he was consuming on a regular basis, his favorite crackers. I mean, he was a toddler at the time, so he had favorite graham crackers, the little things that we took on the road, and he had a little pizza, a frozen pizza that he used to eat. And then, there were 3 different things. And he had this other little container of puffs. And they all had an ingredient that had like a corn-based ingredient, and they all had canola oil in it. And so little by little, I just took out those ingredients and then I reintroduced them. And with each reintroduction, he broke out in this raging skin rash. And so for me, I said, okay, well, what is it that's on? Why would those products create a problem for him, but not other products that didn't contain those? And so for us, it was the discovery that those products contained glyphosate. Glyphosate is an herbicide that's commonly found in the commercial use of Roundup that people spray in their yards, but it's also used as a desiccant in the foods and agriculture, and it's used on genetically modified corn, canola oil, sugar beets, and soy. So those are the 4 common crops. It is used on some other things, but those are the big ones. When I looked a little bit more deeply on that, I said, okay, well, if that's coming in and doing some disruption to his microbiome, could that potentially be the irritant for him and creating this problem? So I said to myself, well, if it's a problem for him, is it a problem for all of us? Why wouldn't it be a problem for all of us? And why don't we just remove it from the house? Let's just remove, these top crops, this, corn, canola, anything that has sugar in it that's non-organic, and soy-based products. And I just basically said, we'll do this for, a month and see how we feel. And I knew in my heart that I was taking out and it wasn't coming back, because I had already gone down the rabbit hole of, it's a registered antibiotic. It's dangerous to immune cells. It was something that I had already in my mind said, this doesn't really belong in anyone's home. It doesn't belong in our food supply. But that wasn't something that I was going to announce to the rest of the family, because I didn't want them to feel that I'm taking away their favorite things. So I just said, let's just remove it and find things that are safer alternatives. But sure enough, his eczema cleared up and it never came back. And so that to me was the telltale sign that his body was responding to that. And then the food allergies that he had to whey and his sensitivity to eggs and all these other things went away. Now, the peanut allergy is something that we didn't reintroduce. That's something that he developed. We don't know if he developed as a result of the glyphosate, or if, that's something that he'd have to do a food challenge. We'll have to take him to an allergist to redo. He's never had an anaphylactic reaction. We've never had to use the EpiPen. Our hope is that, at some point we'll be able to do that challenge for him, but that's not something that we would then re-expose him to on a regular basis without a professional. So all of his food allergies disappeared and all of his eczema disappeared.
That's dramatic. And I hope, my hope is that when people hear this story, it gives them hope. But I wanted to pull out, because I don't want to say what you did was simple. It was not complex. I want to recognize how difficult it is for some people to pull things out of the diet. But I want to pull out a couple of things that you said that I think are really important. One was this idea that to just focus on him, just focus on what are the irritants for him to start with, right? Because I think sometimes we get mired in like, give me the research that when I take dairy out, this is going to solve the problem. Or give me the research that when I take glyphosate out, this is going to solve the problem. And research will never tell us what will be good for an individual. It gives us broad strokes. It gives us theories. It gives us hypotheses. It gives us some facts about, now we know actually what glyphosate, for example, does in the body. But it can never tell you what will happen to your body or to your child's body when you give it or don't give it, right? So I think it's really valuable insight that chase is a little bit futile. We're spending energy in a place that isn't really going to to yield us some results. And we have to be very careful about our energy and where we spend it, right? So I love that little nugget about asking the question, what is irritating for this particular person at this particular time?
Right. And to your point, Jess, too, I think at the time, it can be overwhelming and frustrating. And I think like right now, there was research that just came out of King's College that researchers just confirmed everything that I knew 10 years ago. It's scientifically, they've just discovered that not only does the combination Roundup, in other words, Roundup with the glyphosate, affect and damage the gut microbes and the plant microbes, which we talk about in the film, but also individually glyphosate when it's used as a desiccant to dry crops in agriculture, that also damages the microbiome. And I'll speak a little bit more specifically about what the finding was. This study just came out in 2021. and why this is so important. Now, I was reading some of the early literature, and a lot of that research was blocked by the manufacturer who makes that chemical. So a lot of people say, well, there's no data to support that. And that's true. But that's because that research was blocked and they didn't want that information to be found. Now, I, as a mother, don't care whether there's research to support what I'm witnessing. I'm not, a lot of times we see this with autoimmunity, it takes people 10 years to get an accurate diagnosis. The only thing that's important to me at the time is, do I want to stop the disease pathology in my child who now in front of me is sick, and now when I make these dietary changes is no longer sick? That's the most important thing to me at the time. Now, if you can supply me with research and data to support what I'm doing, great. If you can't, that's okay too, because I have to make a decision in that moment of what am I going to do to restore health. And then when the research comes out to support that, excellent. If it doesn't, and it was something else, then wonderful, we can change course at any time. But the only thing that's important is that you try to make the best educated decision you can based on whatever information you have at the time. And that you are not in a situation where I had two choices. I can try to figure out what's causing the problem, or I can put medication on top of the problem. And that was the second choice, was not what I wanted, which was adding steroids and medication to a 2-year-old. So I had only one choice, which was to figure out what was creating the trigger. Now, what I do want to point out for families here is something what you were saying. We can go through the eliminating foods that are the trigger. I did not want to start removing dairy, removing gluten, removing soy, putting someone on an elimination diet and then keeping them on a highly restrictive diet. That is not a good idea, because now you're restricting a young child and reducing the amount of foods that they're eating. If you can identify something in the diet that is potentially causing a problem and remove it and allow the child's body to heal and restore, and then reintroduce and see what is the potential problem and see if you can reintroduce those foods, then that's better. You're really trying to tease out what is causing the problem. And the nice thing about doing an elimination and then bringing something back in, or doing that challenge, is you also know what is the symptom it's creating, in this case, the rash, because how the body manifests, how it shows that symptom is also a very interesting piece of information. So it really tells you a little bit more about, what happens for that individual child. But it can give information to the rest of the family, because when you take out, a particular ingredient or a particular food, now you have a little piece of information that you can then say, okay, well, what does that ingredient do to everybody else? Mm-hmm. So in our case, we learned a lot about ourselves as well.
I want to add to the earlier thing that you said about, you had to make a choice, like, what am I going to do? And I think sometimes we need to have permission to make a choice on a gut instinct. Just say, you know what, I just think we should do this. And you don't have to, it goes back to what we were talking about our need to know, right? Our need to have proof before we try something.
Trusting our intuition. Yeah.
We have such strong intuition as parents. And sometimes that gets clouded, and then, all of the doubts come into our mind. But I think the way you went about it was really smart, of just, I have a gut intuition. Let's look at what we're eating a lot of. Something is irritating this little body. Let's figure out what it is, and let's just try some stuff. And I think you were potentially lucky. Tell me if you see this in your clients that you work with, but sometimes I find, it's a whole lot easier to do these trials and to get bought into the idea that food actually makes a difference when you see something really tangible like that. Because sometimes it's a lot more subtle. Like you were saying in yourself, it took a lot longer to kind of make those connections, because your symptoms were different. They were pain, and, well, you can maybe describe what was going on for you or how that manifested in you. But when it's something really specific and you can see it, like eczema, you get immediate feedback.
Yes.
Do you see sometimes that it takes longer?
Yeah, well, I think what happens too with adults and with more complex things when you have complex body-wide systemic autoimmune, things that are now system-wide, you have system-wide pain, digestive issues, hormone imbalances, people have Hashimoto's, they have, other complex issues is we get very good at taking things to cover up symptoms. We micromanage our diseases. We supplement our way through different symptoms. We have a good way of we're patching up a lot of what's going wrong. And we also have behaviors that we do to really quell a lot of the symptoms that we're feeling, moving our bowels. People are taking magnesium and doing Epsom baths, and they're doing all these things just to move their bowels. And if you say to them, what if you stripped away all of the therapies that you did and took yourself off all those supplements and stopped, taking your flaxseed and did all that, would you be able to go to the bathroom? And most of them wouldn't. So to me, that's managing chronic disease. That's managing your symptoms. You're just using another set of tools in the toolbox, but the reality is you still have a disease and you're just managing it using holistic practices. You didn't fix anything. It's still there. You still have illness. So, that's the complexity that we see in the adults. Children are not doing that because they don't have those tools yet. But with the adults, you have to be very frank with we have to pull back that curtain and say, okay, what I was doing. The reason I know what it looks like is because I was doing that. I was actually doing that for many, many years, thinking I was well, but I wasn't well. I was just managing it. I was sophisticated around how I camouflaged it.
Mm-hmm. You had a different set of crutches than what the conventional crutches might look like. You have a different set of tools, right?
Yeah. And then you think it's safer to do that because you're doing it with, putting quote marks up, safer, practices, but you're still prolonging an illness or dysfunction in the body. You're just using safer practices. But to me, that's just as dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be. It can be, and it's just perpetuating the same kind of cycles. Hey parents, this episode of the Feeding Families podcast is being brought to you by the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. Do you want to improve your health and well-being, but you're not sure how? Have you an interest in food and nutrition and the science behind it? Kickstart your health journey by learning the fundamentals of holistic nutrition through CSNN's Introduction to Natural Nutrition Certificate. This introductory certificate provides a great understanding of the links between health and nutrition. Successful completion can be transferred to the full natural nutrition program so you can earn your professional designation, title, and diploma. It's available at select CSNN branches. You can learn more at csnn.ca/holistic-family, or you can follow the links in the show notes. So you mentioned that once you took out a few things, a few foods and chemicals, that your son's body started to regenerate and the systems started working well because you recognized it was a microbiome issue and it was an immune issue. It wasn't a food issue. It was the systems issue. So you take these things out so that the systems can relax and rejig, and then all of his food sensitivities went away. The body started receiving food in a softer way or in a more nourishing way, right?
Yes.
I just wanted to highlight that because that is getting to the systems level that you're talking about and really correcting imbalances versus staying in the management level of playing whack-a-mole all the time. Well, I'm going to take out this food, I'm going to take out that food, right?
What I was discovering then and what this new research is pointing out that the scientists were saying, which I thought was so fascinating because it's exactly what I felt was happening at the time. We originally thought that the glyphosate was going in and really damaging the diversity of the microbes, that it was kind of removing a lot of the different species. And that actually is not the case, that there is some damage, but not that much. It doesn't kill off as much as we originally thought. But what it's doing is it's changing the function of the microbes, their biochemical function. The biochemistry of the microbes is changing. And that's the key. That's almost just exactly what you described right now, which means that they're not really operating as they should be. And as you know, we need our microbes to take our food and really convert that food into the biochemicals that we need to function. So there's this incredible, synergy that happens when the food comes in and converts those foods into neurotransmitters and chemicals. We need those microbes to really eat and manufacture our food into the micronutrients that we need to survive. So it is that biochemistry that's changing. And that's what I see. And in my case, as somebody who was chronically ill, and in my son's case, who had symptoms, and then in my other son's case, who had developmental challenges, the issue we were having is we weren't really getting better. We were eating good food, but we were going to therapy. I was going to physical therapy, occupational therapy. He was going to speech therapy. We had another son who was doing all this therapy for his skin, and nothing was translating to permanent change. So I think what's happening is people are trying to eat better. They're trying to eat food. They're doing all these extensive therapies, but nothing is carrying over. We're not seeing any long-lasting change. Like, why aren't we getting better? And I think what's happening is when we have a microbiome that has the ability to make these conversions for us, that's when we see long-lasting change. So I think we have to get out of this place of, can we help people, recover from an infection or recover from a short-term, case of joint pain or things like that. You and I both know we could help people, give them a protocol and help them get well. The bigger question is, can we help people sustain health long-term and be disease-free, chronic disease-free, ailment-free for long periods of time? And if they have setbacks, do they have the tools to maintain that for long-lasting periods? And can they do that with their children? These are the questions we need to be answering. And can we do it? And I think we absolutely can.
That's a big question. I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? It's like, that's the answer to longevity. That's the answer to our healthcare crisis. That's the answer to so many things. So you said that you think we can.
We can.
You think we can. So what are the keys? Can you give us a few key things that we could do as families? We'll bring it back to sort of the family ecosystem that can kind of shift this train wreck of a situation we're in, where half of our kids are predicted to be ill before they finish high school, and chronic disease and autoimmunity and infectious disease and all the bit. What could we be doing differently?
Yeah. Well, one is, I think we have to just shift the idea that we have to treat disease. We have to treat wellness. We have to move the focus away from, thinking that something is wrong, or if somebody does have something wrong, that's what needs our attention. The shift really has to be on treating health. What are the things, the behaviors, the lifestyles, your values around health? What are the things that you prioritize in your family around health, and move your attention there? Wherever your attention is, that's where your focus is going to go. So ultimately, if your attention is on health, then it's very difficult to have a diseased state if you're in a healthy state, right? So you want to actually flip it around as opposed to trying to fix disease. So you're really moving your attention there, even with your children.
I mean, we could have a whole conversation about just that. I mean, that is a huge flip-flop from everything we do around health from the time we give birth, from the time we get pregnant. I mean, maybe when we're pregnant, we're focused on health because we start to think about what we eat, and we start to think about, the birth and giving life and things like that. But then as soon as things get medicalized, it starts to be about disease and illness and treatment and, this sort of different perspective. I think we just fall into it. I think it's just, I don't know where it came from, but it seems to be our default way of looking at the body is to deal with illness and disease rather than support health. Do you think?
Yes, I do. And I also think our tendency too is because life is hard. I mean, I think life is really hard for all of us, and we have a lot on our plate. Families have a lot on their plate. And the tendency is to just, when things go wrong, and that's what happened to me too, right? I just assumed we'd all be healthy. And it wasn't until things fell apart that I was really backed into the corner and felt that I needed to make change. So, I totally get it that we're asking families a lot to really consider that, you have to do all of this. You have to cook for your family, you have to do so much. But I think what you and I have considered before, though, is the cost of not doing it is bigger. Is there's a price to pay that's much larger when we don't put this effort up front. And so what I want to remind families is that when you prioritize removing the irritants, like taking something like glyphosate out of the diet, it really prevents you sometimes from having to spend so much energy fixing on the back end. So I really like to remind people that, this is something that doesn't belong in our food supply. It's very unfortunate that it's there, to really try to focus on not seeing it as such a huge, huge, big issue that it's like, I have to remove it from the entire globe. No, you don't have to do that. It's not your responsibility to do that. But what you can do is just identify, are there any main big sources of it coming into my home, by looking at those top 4 crops, the corn, canola, soy, and sugar beets, and then make sure you pick better choices for yourself. So I use the acronym EAT, where you can say eliminate irritants, add in nutrient-dense food, and then treat health, not disease. So if you use that acronym, you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to just take out these main irritants. I'm going to add in some nutrient-dense food in our diet. And then we're going to really treat health. We're going to focus on health. We're not going to be focused on disease, shift that mindset and move towards, better practices and lifestyle practices, so that people don't feel stressed that they have to change their entire life and add another burden to, an already complex way of living.
Yeah, yeah. And another source, and it depends on where you live on this one, but glyphosate is still a lawn chemical, and some municipalities have banned it, some countries have banned it. It's hard to keep up with all of the governance around chemicals, but yeah, you can still see it in some hardware stores. So I think this is really important to bring it back to doable action steps that are going to give you big bang for your buck, so to speak, right? Because we have to be conscious about where we spend our energy and our money and our, all of our resources. And what from your personal story, but also from now, we have how many years of data on glyphosate, like 10, 20 years of extensive research on what this does inside the body. And at the same time, we have a ton of research about the microbiome. And I'm not sure we need to look much further than the idea that glyphosate is an antibiotic. And if you're getting microdoses of antibiotic all the time, that is going to impact your microbiome. And if you impact your microbiome, you're undermining one of our main regulators of our body. And we've done other episodes on that, on how profound a regulator it is. So that means that if you're dealing with any condition, from pain to skin to eyes to ear, nose, and throat to allergy to anything, you want to support the master regulator. And here's one way to do that.
Right. Even mental health, they say, for every signal that the brain sends down to the gut sends 9 up. So the cross communication between the gut and the brain is huge. And with mental health and depression and anxiety on the rise, we really need to have a healthy microbiome. It's very, very critical that our children maintain a healthy, gut. And so I just think it's more important than ever that we really value the health of our digestive system.
It is. And I always enter this conversation and leave it also with a heavy heart, because it brings up issues of food access. It brings up issues of human rights and healthcare and cost, right? Let's end on talking a little bit about cost effective ways that we can get this stuff out of our families best we can, and what to do if it feels out of reach. What would you say to people who feel like, oh, this is just too expensive and I can't do it? Well,
I love this conversation. Yeah, I love this. I think this is so important. Okay, so one of the things that I think we don't talk about enough is that eating organic processed food is super expensive. And that's what most people do. They switch from eating they try to remove glyphosate or, GMO foods that are sprayed with glyphosate, and then they just switch to an organic version of processed food. And that is super expensive because what it takes to make those products and then the packaging and the manufacturing and to get it to the supermarkets is costly. So that is going to be very expensive. You are going to pay a lot to get packaged food in an organic form in, gluten-free products or organic products. So I would say if that's the plan, then that's going to be a costly endeavor. To eat organic products, real food products or seasonal products, then I would say it absolutely can be done when done mindfully. If you're choosing to eat locally, seasonally, I would choose go to the local farms. I would choose to eat foods that are in season. Buying strawberries when they're not growing in your environment is going to be very costly. You're going to be spending $8 on a box of strawberries when they're not in season because they're being shipped. So we do have to recognize that we have to start thinking a little bit differently about our food and how we're getting it and when we're getting it. So we have to just shift everything. So I often will say to parents, you're shifting lots of things when you change your diet and when you change your mindset around what it means to be healthy, but that also has a financial impact. So you don't just look at your grocery budget, you look at your entire wellness budget. What were you spending on doctor visits? What were you spending on your insurance? What were you spending on medications? What were you spending on time lost from work? And then what were you spending on groceries? You're going to change your entire budget around what it costs to be well. And then you're going to re-look at that. If you just do, this is what it cost me for my weekly groceries, and this is what it costs me now when I buy the same food in an organic version, you're going to be quickly discouraged and you're going to give up. So that is not the way to look at it. You have to change your entire budgetary structure around what it means to be healthy and what it means to have chronic illness. And then you look at it differently. So create an entire different budget. And then try to choose whole foods like a form of protein, local produce, vegetables, and then some type of starch, rice, potatoes, something that is going to be very sustained, that is going to make you feel full, healthy fats, choosing like a nice high quality olive oil or something that is going to really fill the belly. And think about it that way. The organic snacks would be something that would be going in lunch boxes or going to school, because I understand, you're not going to be sending prepared food sometimes to school that's not going to stay well. So what I do for the school snacks is those stay in a chest. They're not in the cabinets where the kids can just have at it. They're in a separate chest. All the school snacks stay there so that, they're not just digging through them, or mine would be gone in a day. I have 3 boys. So you just kind of prioritize that this is the food that goes for travel or camps or things like that. So you just have to shift it a little bit on how you would structure your planning, and you're going to have to minimize some of those processed foods because they are going to be costly, and then buy in bulk when they're on sale, and then definitely do some of the planning soups and stews and big meal planning as far as things that'll be satiating and fill you up.
Yeah, I love that. So much of it is just, reframing priorities. And there are some people who are just, struggling to get anything on the table. And I understand that. I don't want to minimize that. But I like the idea of zooming out a little bit more, because there are also people who struggle to get food on the table, but spend $500 a month on supplements because they're trying to manage, they've fallen into that management kind of situation. And bringing all of that into the same budget, I think, is a really, really wise move. What does it cost to stay healthy?
Yes. Exactly. And I have done lots of work with nonprofit communities. I understand, what it means to budget and to families that are really struggling and have multiple challenges, and single families and split families. So, I understand where they're struggling and what issues come up. So I understand that people also have to compromise, that they're not going to be able to buy 100% organic. And that's why I say, look at the areas where you have the most exposure. Don't try to solve every problem. Sometimes people come to me and they'll say, I just have this issue, or I have this illness and it's still not going away. And I'll look at the foods that they're eating, and every single morning they're eating oatmeal for breakfast. Now, oatmeal is one of the most highly contaminated sources of glyphosate. It is sprayed with glyphosate. So if they're not getting organic oatmeal, then they are getting very, very high doses of glyphosate. So that's an example where they don't have to go through their entire pantry. They have to identify that that's a food that they're commonly eating every single day in the morning, and that food has to be swapped out. So, very specifically, we can identify this is a main source, and then they can change that and they can significantly reduce their intake, because we know that they've already done studies on this, that when people switch to organic, and the reason why I keep mentioning organic is because organic food is not treated with glyphosate. So when the studies are done on people's levels of glyphosate in the body, they're done using organic diets. They see that the glyphosate level is very low, like 0.03.
Which is good news, because it tells us that we do have the capacity to detoxify it and to rid our bodies of it, as long as the inputs stop.
You got it.
Or slow down. That's good news.
That's exactly right.
I feel like we could talk for hours about the nitty-gritty and all the science and all of the things, but I'm mindful of time. I'm going to direct people to the article that you wrote called Starving for Information. It's excellent, and we'll link to it in the notes. And then you also gave me a link where people can watch the Secret Ingredients documentary. Can we share that as well?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
And where else can people go to find you and to find more information? What are reliable sources for understanding the impacts of glyphosate and how to keep it at bay?
Yeah, so they can go to just my name. They can follow me under KathleenDiChiara.com. So it's DiChiara. And I'll have links there. They can see the film. There's also a short version, a 30-minute version. I'm giving you free access to the full feature film, but also I have a short version film of the full feature, which will be available there. And then I'll also have links on the top sources of glyphosate and GMO crops. And, I usually keep that information there so people can quickly see, what are the main sources, where would I commonly find it, and how do I avoid it in my grocery store. So things like that, helpful guides, free resources for people to just print out. So we try to keep it really simple and make it easy for people to not feel overwhelmed by the topic.
It's an overwhelming topic, but it is one of those things. I just want to reiterate that, if you're just sort of spinning, I think sometimes we're spinning, we're just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Where do I start? How do I get a handle on all of this? And I think this is one really tangible thing, looking at the foods that you're eating all the time, understanding that it's the body's reception of the food. It's a system problem. It's not because of the food. It's because of how the body is receiving it. And a very profound thing you can do is to help the body receive food better by taking these antibiotic chemicals out of play, right? I think those are all amazing, amazing tips. Can I ask you just one more question? I'm watching the time tick away, but I have one more question for you, which is this idea that food is medicine. And we hear it all the time, let food be thy medicine. And you've reframed that a little bit to say, let quality food be thy medicine. And I want your take on what would life be like if people really understood that food is food medicine. Do you believe that? And what's the best way to think about that phrase?
Yeah, I prefer to say food is information, because honestly, I don't like the food is medicine phrase at all. I think when we think of medicine, we think of that we have to be sick, to need medicine, that we're often turning to medicine once we're in a state of, dysfunction. Certainly I do. When I don't feel well is when I am kind of looking for those fixes. And so what this messaging I think it was well intended that we kind of grabbed onto that. But then when I think of the general population, the people that are really out there struggling and thinking that they are not sick, they are like, well, I can just carry on my merry way. I don't really need to worry about it. And then what happens is, people will turn to functional medicine or nutritionists as a last resort and expect that food is going to work like medicine does. And it doesn't work that way. They are wanting to take something, a superfood, this or that, and have it take their ailments away. And I just know, I can tell you from having very severe chronic, very, very, very severe chronic pain and a very severe disability at one time, I would not have wanted him to recommend food as medicine to me. I was on high doses of morphine. And if he gave me any other recommendation at that time, he would have really heard a lot from me. That's what I needed at that time. I needed medication at that time. And it was very difficult for me to transition off of that. There was definitely a bridge. I needed to bridge off of that and transition to food and nutrition and lifestyle practices to be well long-term. And I think we need to do that. But I think what's happening now is we're really just putting all this messaging out, and we're confusing people that that food is going to fix their ailments. And I think it's all wrong. And I think we just have to help people better understand that the food that is available to us, real whole food, quality food, has information. We already know now it has information from nature. There's information stored in the DNA of the foods. It's carrying that data into our cells. Our bacteria are digesting that and then bring that into our cellular system. And then our system is essentially changing as a result of that. All of the phytonutrients, 100,000 phytonutrients are coming in through those plant chemical compounds. That's the information we need. When we bring processed food in, we're getting a different set of instructions. Okay. And so when we think of it more as information and not as fixing disease, and we can say, okay, we don't have to be guilty or upset about it. We know, okay, if I splurge and have chips or food and I don't feel quite so good after it, then we can just say, yeah, well, you know what? I knew I was having something and that's okay. I feel a little off today, but I'm going to eat lots of really good food today and I'm going to feel great. We're educated about what we're doing, but we don't have to penalize ourselves or feel bad about it. And I think it's just, we have to shift our focus away from this idea that, yes, it is medicinal and there's certain things, but we have to get away from this messaging that it is medicine because we're tying it to sickness. And I think our entire population needs to be looking at food from a different lens. And I think we're pushing people away that really need to be hearing our messaging around food and what it can do for them, because they don't put themselves in the category of being sick.
Beautifully said. Just beautifully said. Thank you so much for all of your words of wisdoms, all of your nugget. You guys, I very much encourage you to follow the links and read more from Kathleen and connect with her, watch her film. It really changes how you think about what comes into your home and what goes on the table. So thank you so much, Kathleen, for your time. I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Jess. Really appreciate it.
I'm Ransom, inspiration by an Eco-Parent magazine. I was on the cover of the first issue when I was a baby. My dad and the rest of the team have worked hard to bring the Eco-Parent podcast network to life, and I think it's pretty cool. I'd like to help out on it someday, so hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, and give this podcast a review, so that it's still around and thriving when I learn to do the audio editing. Thanks for listening. Was that good?
Yeah, you totally crushed it.